One of the things that I've learned in life, because, at 47, you've learned a lot, is this. I don't know the future. And I can't control the future. I don't know or control the future. And I don't think any one of us does, right? Because if we did, how much grief would we save ourselves? I mean, I think to myself, how many dumb things would I have avoided if I would have just known that that was going to be the outcome of what I did? And I say that as if I would not do it even if I knew the outcome. I probably still would have done it, right? Because I'm that guy. It's like, you come across the bench that's painted that says wet paint, don't touch, and what do? You want to touch it. Like, that's me. But, you see, we live in this time where there's a lot that we just don't know, right? There's a lot that is going on that has got people anxious and worried and wondering, what's going to happen and what do I do? And we live in this time where we've got to figure out how are we going to navigate this time that we live in, this time of uncertainty. And even though I don't know how to control the future, what I do know is the one who does control the future. And as we come to chapter 11 of Daniel, the theme of the message is this: trusting the one who knows the future. Because apart from trusting Jesus, we have no hope. And apart from saying, God, I can't make sense of what's going on in the world, but I trust that you can, and you can do something in this time that we live in, and I'm going to trust you. We are going to be a hopeless people. Daniel chapter 11 is really one of the most amazing and remarkable chapters in the Bible. That's what at least Charles Swindoll said when he reads it. When I read it, I thought to myself, what am I getting myself into? And why am I going to do this? Are people going to throw something at me or leave or what? Because it's interesting. It's going to be a lot of, you're going to look at him and be like, what the heck? What is he talking, huh? And it may actually even seem like a history lesson to some of you, because a lot of it is history. You see, scholars tell us that the first 35 verses in Daniel chapter 11 has at least 135 fulfilled prophecies in them. So there's a lot that is revealed in Daniel chapter 11. It predicts the history of over a 375-year period of time. You see, God, he's outside of our time, and so he knows everything. And he predicts everything that's going on. Why? So that we would be encouraged today, that we could trust God in the midst of all the uncertainties. This chapter is so specific that many of the critics come to it and they say that there is absolutely no way that this could have been written beforehand. There is no way that the accuracy of these prophecies could have been written before the events took place, because it is so accurate. And so what they say is that it has to be written from a historical vantage point, because they don't trust God. And so today what we're going to do is we're going to take a moment and we're going to look back at what God said was going to happen through a vision and a dream to Daniel, to encourage us today to trust the God who knows the future, right? And we're going to do that by looking at 4 things that God is ultimately in charge of. Now, again, you're going to have to bear with me. Some of this is going to be like, what in the heck? And it's going to be a lot of reading. We got 45 verses to go through. And it's going to be a lot of stuff, like I said, it's going to seem like a history lesson. But I hope you get encouraged as we look back and we see his story that God recorded for us. And so the first thing that we're going to see in verses 2 through 4, because we looked at verse 1 last week, is this: God is in charge of kings, right? He's in charge of kings. And in verse 2, we read this: "And now I will tell you the truth. Behold, 3 more kings will arise in Persia, and the 4th shall be far richer than them all. By his strength, through his riches, he shall stir up all against the realm of Greece. Then a mighty king shall arise, who shall rule with great dominion and do according to his will. And when he has arisen, his kingdom shall be broken up and divided towards the 4 winds of the heavens, but not among his posterity, nor according to his dominion with which he ruled. For his kingdom shall be uprooted even for others besides these. So there's an angel interpreting a dream that Daniel had. I don't know about you, but my wife has some pretty weird dreams. Like, you listen to some of these dreams and you're like, what the heck is that? Could you imagine? That's probably what Daniel is experiencing. The only person that I would say has probably stranger dreams than my wife is her father. And sometimes when you sit at our dinner table and you hear the dreams that they're having, it probably sounds a lot like this. Like, this king came from here and this person was uprooted and this and that. And you're like, holy cow. And so could you imagine being in Daniel's position, hearing this and wondering to yourself, what in the world is going on here? And yet to be able to find some sort of encouragement to live in a time of exile through what God revealed to you? You see, Daniel must have found some great encouragement in this to keep going. And he would have understood, because how many kings did he actually serve under as an exile in Babylon? Is he would have understood that God is in charge of the kings, the people that are in leadership. Now, these 4 kings, I'm going to try to pronounce their names, and you're probably going to look at me like you don't know what you're saying. I'm going to admit to you right now, I don't know how to pronounce them, but my hope is probably neither do you. So because I'm up front, we'll go with what I'm saying, and then we'll go from there. So here are the first 4 kings. Cambyses, he was there from 529 to 522 BC. Then you have Pseudo-Smerdis from 522 to 521. Then you have Darius the First Hystraps from 521 to 486, ultimately stopping at Xerxes from 496 to 465. Now, Xerxes is the Ahasuerus that we read about in the book of Esther. So now what do we see? We see Esther being connected to the book of Daniel in that time period. Now, Xerxes was probably the most important of the 4 kings. His empire reached from Ethiopia to India, but yet he had this strange passion. His desire was to conquer Greece. You're probably thinking to yourself, why would he want to conquer Greece? What did Greece ever do to him? Don't know. But that was his passion. He wanted to do that. And in 480 BC, he tried. He was defeated. And that took place between chapters 1 and chapter 2 of the book of Esther, right? And so now all of a sudden what we see is this prophecy being fulfilled in the book of Esther by just coming to chapters 1 and chapters 2 of the book of Esther. When he came home, he was bitter and angry. Why? Because he lost. He was humbled. He didn't like losing, right? And so what does he do? He turns to his harem to try to find relief for his wounded pride, because for some reason that just sounded like the right thing to do. Well, it caused some great problems, right? But that's what ushers into, for us, Esther into the scene, where Esther would be a part of redeeming, or not redeeming, but being the part of the salvation of a whole nation. Here Esther is, I'm sure she grew up not thinking, hey, my goal in life is to be this queen. But here she found herself with this guy who has a harem, who wasn't going to treat her well, wondering. Now, she could have come to Daniel chapter 11 and said, you know what? God's in charge of kings. And because he's in charge of kings, I got to trust that he put me here to be the queen for a reason. I may not like it, but I'm here for a reason. And so Esther is ushered in because of this. Xerxes was assassinated in August of 465 BC. Now, there was a mighty king that was spoken of in verse 3, and that was Alexander the Great. He comes up, and he was determined to punish the Persians because of Xerxes. So he was upset, so he wants to go take these guys out. And in 332 BC, Alexander defeated the Persians, and then in 323, he died. He had no kids, right? He didn't get to stand up and get a knife on Father's Day. And his kingdom was then divided to 4 of his generals. God used Alexander's conquest as part of his perfect plan. You see, God used it to spread the Greek language and the Greek culture. And if you think about it, it led to the eventual spreading of the gospel. Why? What is the original language of our New Testament? But Greek. Do you see how it all comes together? And so what we need to understand is this: when the king isn't who you voted for, right? Trust the King of Kings. Trust that he's still in charge and very much at work. And he's still bringing the good news of the gospel through you and I in the world that we live in. Because God's in charge of kings. But what we're going to see in verses 5 through 20 is this: God's also in charge of kingdoms. And in verse 5 we read this: also the king of the south. Now this is where it gets weird. Just so you know, you're going to be like, holy cow, this sounds like one big dysfunctional family. And it is. Bear with me. Also the king of the south shall become strong, as well as one of his princes, and he shall gain power over him and have dominion. His dominion shall be a great dominion, and at the end of some years they shall join forces, for the daughters of the king of the south shall go to the kings of the north to make an agreement, but she shall not retain the power of her authority, and neither he nor his authority shall stand, but she shall be given up with those who brought her, and with him who begot her, and with him who strengthened her in those times. And so one of the four generals would become stronger and greater than the others, right? This was fulfilled with Ptolemy the first of Egypt. And what he ended up doing is he ended up controlling the Holy Land. Now, Ptolemy had a prince named Seleucus. He also rose to power, and he took dominion over the region of Syria, right? And so you have the Seleucids, which were the king of the north, and the Ptolemies, which were the king of the south, and in between them, you had Israel. And Israel was kind of the pawn that, whichever one rose to power was over Jerusalem or over Israel at that time and had control of it. And but here you have the Seleucids and the Ptolemies, and they fought for 130 years, and the stronger one of the two would control the Holy Land at that time. Now, the king of the north and the king of the south, they were allies, but only for a short time, and that arrangement didn't last very long. It was like, we can't get along, we can't play nice together, you're not going to find them in the sandbox, as kids. And so they had this plan, right? And here was what the plan was. The daughter of the king of the south went to the king of the north to make an agreement with him. Hey, let's have a treaty, right? Let's marry, right? And so this marriage was between Antiochus II from the Seleucid family and Bernice, the daughter of Ptolemy. Now, Antiochus had a wife already, but to try to kind of make this all work, he kicked out that wife, married this wife, and to try to have this, unity take place. Sound really weird? It gets worse. So there was peace for a time because of this marriage, but it was upset when Ptolemy II died. Once he died, right, Antiochus II put away Bernice, took back his former wife, Laodice. Laodice didn't trust her husband, Antiochus, so she poisoned him. Okay? After the murder of Antiochus II, Laodice also had Bernice, her son, and her attendants killed. And after this, Laodice, what she did was she put her son, Seleucus II, on the throne of Syria. Welcome to days of our Syrian lives. Right? Talk about chaos. Anyway, keeps going. Verse 7. But from a branch of her roots, one shall arise in his place, who shall come with an army, enter the fortress of the king of the north, and deal with them and prevail. And he shall also carry their gods captive to Egypt with their princes and their precious articles of silver and gold. And he shall continue more years than the king of the north. Also the king of the north shall come to the kingdom of the kings of the south, but shall return to his own land. Now this happened when Ptolemy III, who was the brother of Bernice, was to avenge the murder of his sister. Ptolemy III invaded Syria, right? And he actually lived 4 years longer than Seleucus II did. That's what we know. Keeps going. However, his son shall stir up strife and assemble a multitude of great forces, and one shall certainly come and overwhelm and pass through Then he shall return to his fortress and stir up strife, and the king of the south shall be moved with rage and go out and fight with him, with the king of the north, who shall muster a great multitude, but the multitude shall be given into the hand of his enemy. When he has taken away the multitude, his heart will be lifted up, and he will cast down 10,000s, but he will not prevail. Right? Could you imagine this dream coming to you? I mean, man. But here's what happened. The sons of the king of the north would continue in this battle. One of the sons would conquer the Holy Land, which stood as a buffer between the king of the south and the kings of the north. The assembling of this great multitude happened with Seleucus III and Antiochus III, the two sons of Seleucus II. Both were successful generals. Seleucus III ruled for a short time and was succeeded by his brother. Antiochus III would take back the Holy Land from the Ptolemies, right? Now the angel tells Daniel that the king of the south would attack and meet a great multitude of soldiers from the kingdom of the north. Now, the king of the north would be defeated. This happened when Antiochus III was defeated in what's called the Battle of Raphia. This is all history. You could read about this. That's why I'm saying this is like a history class. All right. Then he was forced to give back dominion of the Holy Land to Ptolemies IV. So here goes Israel again, back and forth. Who's ruling us? Who's, right? Where's Daniel? He's in this kingdom, right? Ruled in Babylon with a king that he didn't sign up to be ruled by, but he's Jewish. And now he's seeing what's going to happen with his heritage and his upbringing is they're going to be bounced around, right? It goes on, verse 13. For the king of the north will return and muster a multitude greater than the former, and shall certainly come at the end of some years with a great army and much equipment. Now, in those times, many shall rise up against the king of the south. Also, violent men of the people shall exalt themselves in fulfillment of the vision, but they shall fall. So the king of the north shall come and build a siege mound and take a fortified city, and the forces of the south shall not withstand him. Even his choice troops shall have no strength to resist. But he who comes against him shall do according to his own will, and no one shall stand against him. He shall stand in the glorious land with destruction in his power. So the angel told Daniel that the northern dynasty would defeat the kings of the south, giving the king of the north dominion over the promised land. This happened when Antiochus III invaded Egypt, gaining final control over the armies of Ptolemies V and the Holy Land. Now, the Jews living in the land helped Antiochus III defeat the king of the south because the Jews resented the rule of Ptolemies. They thought it was a good idea. Hey, anybody against this guy? We don't like him. Let's help. Now, they welcomed, that is the Jews, Antiochus III as their liberator from the Egyptian rule, but their decision proved unwise when he turned upon them in the land and, didn't let things go so well, right? Verse 17, he shall also set his face to enter with the strength of his whole kingdom and upright ones with him. Thus shall he do, and he shall give him the daughters of women to destroy it. But she shall not stand with him or be for him. After this, she shall turn his face to the coastlands and shall take many, but a ruler shall bring the reproach against them to an end. And with the reproach removed, he shall turn back on him. Then he shall turn his face towards the fortress of his own land, but he shall stumble and fall and not be found. There shall arise in his place one who imposes taxes on the glorious kingdom, but within a few days he shall be destroyed, but not in anger or in battle. So can somebody help me with that one? Right? Holy cow, right? So the king of the north who ruled the Holy Land would attempt to destroy the king of the south again. Right? You see the feud, the battle? There's a real battle going on. That's what I think the angel's trying to get to us to understand. There's a real battle going on. he attempted by giving the king of the south the daughters of women to destroy, and this wasn't successful. Now this happened when Antiochus III gave his daughter Cleopatra to Ptolemys V of Egypt. So he said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to intermarry. Like, here's my daughter. Like, great, Dad, thanks. Not Father's Day material right there. Like, you're not celebrating that, Dad. I'm just saying, right? He was hoping to gain influence and control in Egypt. That was his whole plan in this. The plan didn't succeed because Cleopatra wasn't faithful to her Egyptian husband. Okay? The king of the north then turned his efforts towards the coastland. Fine, we'll go to the coastland then. He stopped by one who was formerly under reproach until there was this stumbling and he would not be found. That's what we're told here. Now that happened when Antiochus III turned to the area of Asia Minor and Greece. He was helped by Hannibal, the famous general of Carthage. But a Roman general named Lucius Cornelius Scipio defeated Antiochus in Greece. He returned to his former region, having lost all that he had gained, and died shortly after that. Just what was said was going to happen. After this defeat, Antiochus III, he came to a humbling end. Right? He was defeated. He needed money. So what is his plan? I'm going to go to Babylon, and I'm going to rob a temple. Sounds like a good idea, right? I need money. Let's go to the temple. Like, that's where the money is. So off he goes, but some of the locals said, no, you're not robbing our temple, and killed him. It's like crazy chaos, right? And here it is, and man, and you see, as we look at this relationship between Egypt and Syria and the family relationships among the Seleucids and the Ptolemies, we have to realize this. The ancient world had its share of political deception, violence, greed, and war. What are you laughing about? Good thing we don't experience that in our day and age, right? You see, power and wealth cause men and women to violate human rights, divine laws, while going to any length to get what they want. That's what was going on there. And you can't help but realize that human nature hasn't changed much, has it? Right? But what we need to understand is this: God is not responsible for the evil that has happened in the name of government and religion. He allowed it to happen, but he's not responsible for it. And so when the government seems more like a soap opera, what do we need to do? We need to remember that God is the God of history, and that he is still working his perfect plan because God's in charge of kingdoms, even ours. Right? So many people look at what's going on in our world and they want to give up. This is why it's so important for us to look back at Daniel chapter 11 and gain some encouragement that if God can work with that mess, he's still working in ours today. He's not done working. Why? Because he's in charge of kings and kingdoms. And the next thing that we're going to see in verses 21 through 35 is that God's in charge of times and locations. And this is where we enter the picture. Right? Verse 21, and in his place shall arise a vile person. Oh, great, thanks. Like that wasn't bad enough, right? Right? To whom they will not give the honor of royalty, but he shall come in peaceably and seize the kingdom by intrigue. With the force of a flood they shall be swept away from before him and be broken, and also the prince of the covenant. And after the league is made with him, he shall act deceitfully, for he shall come up and become strong with a small number of people. He shall enter peaceably even into the richest places of the province. And he shall do what his fathers have not done, nor his forefathers. He shall disperse among them the plunder, spoil, and riches, and he shall devise his plan against the strongholds, but only for a time. He shall stir up his power and his courage against the king of the south with a great army. And the king of the south shall be stirred up to battle with a very great and mighty army. But he shall not stand, for they shall devise plans against him. Yes, those who eat of the portion of his delicacies shall destroy him. His army shall be swept away, and many shall fall down slain. Both these kings' hearts shall be bent on evil, and they shall speak lies at the table, but it shall not prosper, for the end will still be at the appointed time. So the angel tells Daniel that the next king would be a vile person, that he wouldn't be recognized as royalty, but he will take his power by intrigue. So he comes into power in a different way. Now this happened with the succession of Seleucus III, who was named Antiochus IV. He didn't come into the throne legitimately. He wasn't voted in, right? He got the throne, how? By murdering his brother. Man, goes from bad to worse. Antiochus didn't use terror, but flattery, promises, and intrigue to gain people's respect and gain their trust, right? The angel told Daniel that the new king would attempt a deceitful covenant with the kings of the south, but that would fail, causing a great battle that would change the balance of power, right? The stirring of power happened when Antiochus Epiphanes pretended to be friends, attempting to catch them off guard. They say, hey, let's be friends. Let's sit down for dinner. But what are we told? Both these kings didn't tell the truth. They both lied to each other. They were both trying to deceive each other, but they wanted to be friends. They tried this kind of, let me just kind of sneak in. Let me compromise a little bit, right? But Antiochus was defeated, and this was important because Egypt beat Antiochus with the help of Rome. Okay? At the end of it all, Antiochus and his kingdom would be ruled under the dominion of Rome. This brings Rome into the picture now, and we'll get to that in a second. But after this battle, when Antiochus was defeated, a Roman general, what he did is he drew a circle around Antiochus, demanding to know that if he would surrender and pay tribute to Rome, and he had to let him know before he stepped out of that circle. Right? And then from that day forward, Antiochus took the orders from Rome and was under the Roman dominion. One of the things that Rome is known for is their roads, right? Everything kind of went from Rome out into the known world. So now Rome is brought into the picture. And what it's reminding us is this, that because of Rome, now the gospel would be able to go forth and be dispersed. That God's in control, or in charge, I should say, of times and locations. But in verse 28, we read this, while returning to his land with great riches, his heart shall be moved against the holy covenant, so he shall do damage and return to his own land. At the appointed time he shall return and go towards the south, but it shall not be like the former or the latter. For ships from Cyrus shall come against him. Therefore he shall be grieved and return in rage against the holy covenant and do damage. So he shall return and show regard for those who forsake the holy covenant, and forces shall be mustered by him, and they shall defile the sanctuary fortress. Then they shall take away the daily sacrifice and place there the abomination of desolation. Those who do wickedly against the covenant he shall corrupt with flattery. But the people who know their God shall be strong and carry out great exploits. And those of the people who understand shall instruct many, yet for many days they shall fall by the sword and flame, by captivity and plundering. Now when they fall, they shall be aided with a little help, but many shall join with them by intrigue. And some of those of understanding shall fall, to refine them, purify them, and make them white until the time of the end, because it is still for the appointed time. So now the angel tells Daniel that what you're seeing is for an appointed time, for the time of the end. And this is actually what brings us into the equation. You see, This described what happened when Antiochus Epiphanes set up the image of Zeus in the temple, demanded sacrifices to be made, and then desecrated the temple by sacrificing a pig on the altar. Verses 2 through 34 chronicle 470 years of Jewish history. 470 years. But it's interesting because when we get to verse 35, all of a sudden what happens is verse 35 leapfrogs over centuries. Why? Well, the first 32 verses speak of Daniel's 69 weeks, the first 69 of the 70 weeks of Daniel. While verse 35 speaks of Daniel's 70th week. In between verses 34 and 35 is what? The church age, the age of grace, the time that we live in. You see, the gospel has already come to the ends of the earth through the Roman road to us, right? The age of the church. But this is where we come into play, where we realize that what God recorded for Daniel through this dream was meant for us today, not just to encourage Daniel back then, but to encourage us today not to give up, to realize that God is in charge of times and location, even ours. That God has a plan for the time that we live in. God chose you and me to be here at this time. He didn't choose Daniel. He didn't choose the apostles. He didn't choose David or Moses or Abraham. He chose you and he chose me. To trust the one who knows the future, to live faithfully, like to do what? What does he say? To refine them, purify them, and to make them white until the time of the end. God put us here with the message of the gospel to proclaim to a lost and dying world. You see, the world is watching to see how we will respond as the bride of Christ. Are we really trusting our groom? Are we really trusting him, saying, God, we know theologically anyway that you are in charge of the future, but practically, do we live that out? But this was for the time of the end. This is for the time when the church age is over and the bride of Christ is raptured up, that ushers in the 70th week of Daniel, when we're taken out of this world, where all of a sudden the tribulation begins. And this is why Daniel jumps from Antiochus to the end times. And so when you wonder why things are the way that they are, we have to remember that this is what links us to what God is doing. Showing us that God is in charge of locations and times, even yours. Because what that will do is it'll cause you to look at life differently. When you go to the grocery store, you realize that I didn't just happen to go to this grocery store, but God put me here, and there's going to be people that come into my life in the checks, as I'm checking out, as I'm walking down the aisles, as I'm going about just grocery shopping, or when I go out to a restaurant, to trust that, man, that this is a divine appointment for me to proclaim the message of the gospel to the waitress, to the wait staff, to the owners of that. You see, it gives value to the time that you live in, and it says God's in charge of that time. Not just all of history. I think sometimes we step back and we think, yeah, God's in charge of it all, so he doesn't have time for the details of my life. But what we're seeing here is, no, God's in charge of even the details of your life. The final thing that we're going to look at in verses 36 through 45 is that God is in charge of the future. All right? Then the king shall do according to his own will. He shall exalt and magnify himself above every god, shall speak blasphemies against the God of gods, and shall prosper till the wrath has been accomplished. For what has been determined shall be done. He shall regard neither the God of his father, nor the desires of women, nor regard any God. For he shall exalt himself above them all. But in their place he shall honor a God of fortresses, and a God which his fathers did not know. He shall honor the gold and silver with precious stones and pleasant things. Then he shall act against the strongest fortresses with a foreign god, which he shall acknowledge and advance its glory, and he shall cause them to rule over many and divide the land for gain. At the time of the end, The king of the south shall attack him, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, with chariots, horsemen, with many ships. And he shall enter the countries, overwhelm them, and pass through. He shall also enter the glorious land, and many countries shall be overthrown, but these shall escape from his hand. Edom, Moab, and the prominent people of Ammon. He shall stretch out his hand against the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. He shall have power over the treasuries of gold and silver and over the precious things of Egypt. But the Libyans and the Ethiopians shall follow at his heels. But news from the east and the north shall trouble him. Therefore he shall go out with great fury to destroy and annihilate many. And he shall plant the tents of his palace between the seas and the glorious holy mountain. Yet he shall come to his end, and no one will help him. The Old and New Testament teach that there's a great time of tribulation that's coming. That's what that 70th week of Daniel is revealing to us. And that one day, that is all going to come to an end. That the world as we know it is going to come to an end. And our interpretation of Daniel's 70th week in chapters 9, verses 24 through 27 locates this period as the last week of biblical prophecy. That's what we have here. Now, the event that triggers the beginning of this last 7-year period is the signing of a covenant with Israel by a powerful leader from a 10-nation confederacy in Europe, right, that rises to power. The reason for this covenant is the guarantee of a protection for Israel while the Jews rebuild their temple. Because right now, right, the Jews have been this pong in between the north and the south, and they can't worship because they don't have a temple. And they have a problem because the site where they were to build their temple, there's another worshiping site there, the Dome of the Rock. And those two groups, if you haven't known, don't get along. They don't like each other. So what has to happen is this man with a plan comes up and he's like, hey, here's the deal. You can rebuild your temple. We'll have this peace treaty. The Jews are like, hey, great. Because their whole thought is this, right? The Messiah is the one that is going to bring the peace that enables us to build our temple. And that's what they're looking for. And when that comes, they're going to worship this guy as the Messiah. And so this covenant is signed, this agreement is going on, and then that's the beginning of this tribulation period. The tribulation ends, though, with Jesus' return when he binds the Antichrist and Satan to the lake of fire in Revelation chapter 19. And that's the end, right? This ruler, the Antichrist, when he shows up, he doesn't show up in his true colors, right? He shows up and he assumes leadership. He's he begins as a man of peace, solving the problems between the Arabs and Israelis, right? He's probably a master politician. But in the middle, his true colors are revealed, right? By doing what? Breaking the covenant that he made. Right? Sets himself up as God and demands to be worshiped. Gabriel describes this man as a selfish, amazing orator who exists for himself with no religious faith. Sounds exactly like the politician the world is looking for, doesn't it? Does to me. No faith, no nothing. Great guy, likable, he's got a big smile. This guy's going to have a successful career, so it seems, until what? Jesus comes back. Because God's in charge of the future. God's in charge of the future. And Jesus is going to come back and he's going to establish his kingdom. Not only will the Antichrist reject all religion in general, but he's going to oppose specifically the Jewish religion in particular, especially the hope that they have for the return of the Messiah to deliver them. Do you know why Israel is such a hot topic? Because that's where God says he's going to come back. And if Israel's not a nation, if his people are wiped out, why would God come back? When the people worship this man of sin, they're actually worshiping Satan, who empowers the Antichrist. Like Antiochus, centuries before, the Antichrist will reward those who worship him and his false god. Guys, the God of the Bible predicts, or maybe I shouldn't say predicts. The God of the Bible makes known the future. He lets us know because from his vantage point, he sees it all. But until Jesus is coming for his bride, the time that we live in, may we be those who put our faith in the God of the Bible. That trust Jesus with our lives, trusting that he knows and is in charge of the future. That we would be those that acknowledge that God has placed us here and now with a message for the world around us, that he's given us the good news, he's given us the gospel to proclaim to the world around us. Guys, it's not time for us to give up as a church. It's not time for the church to wave a white flag. God hasn't lost. Right? He's still very much in charge of what's happening, and he placed us here specifically for a purpose. And what I'm not saying is try to be somebody you're not. God placed you who you are with your gifts, your talents, here for a reason. And he says just be you and proclaim the message of the gospel the way you perceive it, the way you embrace it, the way it's impacted your life. This is one of the reasons we have kids in here for our first set of worship, because we want our kids to see what worship looks like, and who best to learn that from but from their parents and from you. We look at the kids and we're like, they're not the church of tomorrow, they're their church today. They have a place to play in the church today in a very real way. One of the reasons for doing this bounce house barbecue, it's not because I'm bored and want something else to do. I really don't want to stand there in the heat watching kids go down a water slide. That's not fun for me. The eating part I can handle. But the other part, I'm not sure. You're like, I know. But the point is this, here's little kids that can take a flyer and invite their friends, and who comes with their friends? With their parents. And now all of a sudden, we have a place where we're saying, you know what? We love our community, and we invite you here so that you can experience the love of the God that we know. And all we do is open our doors and do what we do. Love people. Here we are. Our doors are open just like God did for us. So we don't have to try to be somebody else. Just be us. We need to be those that say that Jesus is in charge of kings and kingdoms. And Jesus is coming back soon. And he loves humanity, and he placed us here to let them know that. But may we be those that take the Word of God, the Bible, and allow it to purify our hearts, purify our lives. And may that Word be that which encourages us to proclaim the gospel to a lost and dying world. Like I said, guys, now is not the time to give up. No. If ever there was a time in human history to press in and press on, it's now. Because there is a lost and dying world that doesn't know what they're looking for, but they're looking for something because they've been disappointed in what the world has to offer. Now is not the time. I think the greatest thing to happen to the church was the coronavirus, personally, because it's caused us to be purified. It's caused us to do away with fluff and only have what is essential, and that is Jesus and him crucified and his love for us. So may we be those who press in and hold on to Jesus. That say, God, you know what? I'm going to love you with all my heart, mind, soul, and strength. And then from that place, I'm going to love my neighbor. Because it's when we do that that we realize that God's in charge of kings and kingdoms, times and locations, and the future. And he placed us here with that redeeming message of the love of God to proclaim to the world around us. So guys, know this. You are loved by the God who's in charge of the future. And he's never going to let you down. And he'll never leave you. He'll never forsake you. And he will be with you, even in the troubling times that we experience. Amen.